is probably the biggest problem I have with this theory. It's completely come up from here. This man, Julius Wellhausen, came up with it, and it just sort of, like Hitler said, tell a lie big enough and people will believe it. Well, that's more or less how this tradition got its reputation. This man came up with this theory. He completely made it up out of his own head. No evidence, no archaeological support, nothing, except reading the text and saying, how come there are these different, these oddities? Well, I know, I'll make this up. And people saw it and thought it was a good idea and ran with it. The irony is that this was extremely popular at the turn of the century, last century. It completely overwhelmed European and American seminaries. They gobbled it up like it was gold from the gods. Completely uncritical of the critical historical method. They said, aha, now we can stop believing Moses wrote this. We have an alternate theory. And it helps explain these oddities that the Moses idea simply doesn't, quite frankly. I've always wondered why Moses described himself as the most humble man, but I couldn't figure it out. Now I do. Someone added that later on. How could Moses write about his death? Oh, I know, someone added it later. Oh, this makes sense. Why didn't I see it before? Get it?
Who follows this? Are there atheists?
Mostly, modern critical scholars hold to some version of this that's been later adapted. This is the basic form.
Are there temples, churches, buildings where they gather and follow this?
Not per se, no. This is more of a scholastic explanation to the question, how was the Bible written?
In seminaries?
Yes. You'll find this at Harvard and Yale and Princeton and all of these other seminaries. You'll find it in certain Catholic universities. You'll find it in your St. Joseph's Bible. Yes. You open up your St. Joseph's Bible, you go into the introduction. This is how they explain how Genesis, Exodus, and Leviticus was written. Okay? Yes?
What has been the most prominent rebuttal to this?
Ah, we're getting there. You're reading my mind.
Chip, what religion did Wellhausen belong to? Or did
He didn't have a religion.
Okay.
He was an atheist. Wellhausen, the man who came up with this theory. He was an atheist. He didn't believe in God.
So why would Catholics put this in their introductory?
When you find that answer out, come report to me.
He's a troublemaker. Yeah.
I have been asking that question all of my Catholic life because when I went to St. Gregory's Bible study, they said, this is Catholic doctrine. And I said, it's grape nuts. Grape nuts. It's not grapes and it's not nuts. It's whatever it is, it's not grapes and it's not nuts. This is not Catholic doctrine, I want you to know, my brothers and sisters. It wasn't invented by a Catholic. It wasn't even invented by a believer. It was invented by a scholar, a scripture scholar, who was an atheist. He had no faith in God.
So he spent time debunking.
Yes, now you got it, my dear.
Like Martin Luther.
Question, Chip, what is this the case? Why do people allow us to translations allow this in some Catholic universities?
When you find the answer answer to that question. Report back to me. I have been asking these questions for well over 26 years. This is why I didn't become a Catholic for nearly a year, because I was just told flat out, Chip, you need to accept it. This is Catholic doctrine. This is Catholic scholarship. And I go, it's grape nuts. I knew this from going to Biola. Biola told me about this because this stuff infested all of Protestantism during the turn of the last century. And many of the churches collapsed because they lost their faith in the Bible.
What the enemy wants.
And so I was at a conservative Christian university that was saying, you need to be aware of this so that you can debunk it. Well, I thought at the time that they were nuts. I didn't pay much attention to it until I started investigating the Catholic faith. And then right in front of my face, this happened. And I was like, holy mackerel, I need to go back over my notes. I didn't pay any attention when I was in my early Hebrew class because I didn't think anyone took this seriously. And I was like, I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked. I really didn't know what to do. I was really in a quandary. That's why I dropped out of RCIA. I said, I've got to figure this out, because if what they're saying is true, then I need to reevaluate whether the church is really the church. Because if you believe this, this is nonsense. This is not, there's no evidence for it. I mean, the emperor has no clothes. Do you understand that? And here's the irony. Modern scholars, like now, recognize the documentary hypothesis, but fewer and fewer and fewer are accepting it because there's no evidence for it. They realize that Wellhausen completely invented this idea without any archaeological or textual support, other than reading the text and coming up with an explanation for the oddities that he saw. That's it. That's it. That's the truth of the matter. So, I am not leaving you hanging here. There is a good, faithful Catholic response to this. And I would refer you to the Ignatius Catholic Bible Study Genesis commentary as a good place to begin. Because when it gets to the question of authorship, right here on page 13. Now, in it, in the beginning, Scott Hahn talks about this documentary hypothesis because, like I said, it has dominated scholarship of all veins for over 100 years. You cannot not acknowledge its existence. It's there, okay, as a theory. But he goes on and shows, well, I'm just going to read part of it because I think it's well worth it. Modern scholarship has largely abandoned the tradition of Mosaic authorship in favor of a theory of multiple authorships. This new paradigm, called the documentary hypothesis, holds that Genesis is the work of several writers whose contributions were pieced together into a single literary work long after Moses. Okay? The documentary scholars generally contend that Genesis is a composite of two epic narratives, J and E, that were joined together and later expanded by additions of a priestly writer, P. On this hypothesis, the composition of Genesis began around 900 BC and came to an end somewhere around 400 BC. Most who adopt this view acknowledge that the stories in Genesis are often much older than their written form, and some would allow that certain parts of its contents may indeed be Mosaic in authorship. Did you hear that? So even if you believe this JEPD stuff, you have to acknowledge, if you're on the other side, that there are some parts of this that are much older than you're giving them credit for. So you have to acknowledge that. See, the historical archaeological evidence doesn't back the theory. So you have to either adjust your theory, abandon it, or come up with something else. This is why many scholars are no longer in favor of a strict view of this. Even if you're a liberal scholar, you can't hold to it because the evidence isn't there. And so modern scholarship is all about evidence. Where's the evidence? This is something that was created up here. This is where the evidence is. This man's thoughts. That's nice, dear. Where's the evidence? Keep reading. Studies of the book of Genesis within its Near Eastern content tend to confirm both the antiquity and the authenticity of its traditions. Comparative evidence can be read to suggest an origin for the Genesis stories in the 2nd millennium BC, at a time roughly contemporary with the historical Moses. Liberal scholars, 0. The Bible, 1. Whenever people start attacking the Bible, invariably the historical archaeological evidence catches up with them. And again, 0 proof on your side, 1 for the Bible, again, as the historical document it is. I'm not going to read the rest of this. I'm going to leave that to you. But this is a good place to start.
There is a movie, I think it's a Christian movie, came out like 3 or 4 years ago. It's God is Not There. It's about a student, you know.
I'm familiar with it.
IT as a professor. So, same thing. I have a friend. He's a atheist. He doesn't believe in God. He always said, you know, the Old Testament, it was a fable. It's all, you know, but the miracles God did when Israel they were back in Egypt, it wasn't real, you know. But then when you know, the funny thing is, then here like it started like reading the Bible, and now he said like, God is God.
Yes.
So he converts his life to a Christian now.
Amen.
Yeah.
Good job.
Really a follower,
The reason I am going through all of this, because most of you probably didn't even care about any of this. You probably never even thought about it.
Right.
The fact of the matter is that because I personally was run right into this in my conversion, the fact that you will see this in your St. Joseph's Bible for your introduction gets under my skin. Because, like I said, this idea is grape nuts. It's not grapes and it's not nuts. This is not Catholic and it's not theological. It's something else. And you have to be aware of it, my brothers and sisters. The good news for you that I didn't have 25 years ago is now we have faithful Catholic documents like this. That doesn't deny that there are problems with the text if we look at it singly, but it doesn't throw out everything in favor of an atheistic approach. That it's a both and proposition. It looks at the modern critical scholar and says, what are the benefits of looking at the text critically that we can learn more about it? How God transmitted this through Moses and its subsequent traditions. Okay? So I'll get to why are there 2 different Genesis stories? Why are there 2 different things in Noah's story? Because there are answers for that that are equally reasonable. And without throwing it out with crazy theories like JEPD. Do you hear what I'm saying, my brothers and sisters? So just hang tight. And I would say if you're really bugged about it, read the commentary. It'll help explain that. Another one is the Introduction to the Old Testament by John Bergsman and Brant Petrie. This is the book I'm talking about. This was when I was studying the Pentateuch in JP Catholic. John Bergsma was the professor at the time, so I felt very privileged to be in his class online to learn the Pentateuch from him because he authored this book. And I and all the other JP Catholic students got preview copies of it before its publication to use in our papers. And I'm telling you, the scholarship in here is second to none as far as Catholic, Orthodox, faithful understanding of where we got these traditions from. So I don't know of another book that's better than this to go to. Now, if you don't want to read this 700-page tome, and it is 700-odd pages long. Now, it's not just on Genesis, it's the whole Old Testament, so let's be fair. I mean, the Old Testament's long, but nevertheless, what can you do? This is a good summary I found online. It's called Catholic Straight Answers. Did Moses write the Pentateuch? I love it. It was very precise. It starts out here. One reason for this credit is the recognition in the gospel of Moses' teaching. For example, concerning marriage, the Sadducees specifically say the law of Moses. Jesus replies, "Have you not read in the book of Moses?" Other passages as well refer to Jesus' teaching of Moses and the prophets. Everything written about me in the law of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms had to be fulfilled. So Jesus keeps affirming that Moses had a hand in writing the law. That one verse I gave you was just one. There are many others I want you to know. So again, I have a real problem when someone says Moses didn't write any of this, because you're making a liar out of Jesus. Do you understand that? You have to answer then to me, what did Jesus mean when he keeps saying, Moses wrote of me, Moses wrote, Moses wrote, Moses wrote? If he didn't write it, why didn't he say the priests wrote it?